Hello and welcome to the April webinar in my Childless Chats Over Cocktail series. This month we are talking about the topic of what we nurture in our lives as childless women. So this topic was actually thought of by one of my guests, April. So I'm really excited. I think it's such a great idea for a discussion to be having. And I have two amazing guests. So we'll introduce them in a second, but I just wanted to let you guys know, if you're new to Zoom, that there are a couple options. If you want to be able to see everybody that's speaking or on the panel at the same time, you can, up in your right hand corner, change from speaker view to gallery view. We also have a chat box and a question box. So if you would like to ask a question to our panelists, we'll be doing questions in the last 15 minutes. So you can add your comments or questions there. And to get us started, to see how it works, if you guys want to put in the chat box where you are listening in from, and if you are drinking something fun. I'm not drinking anything this week because I didn't have time to make anything, and it's noon, so it felt too early to get started. But all right, so let's see, let's go ahead and do our guest introduction. So April, since this was your great idea for a topic, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, as well as where people could connect with you?
Sure. So I'm so glad to be here with you, because I really so feel that this work and these kind of gatherings for women in our experience is so absolutely needed. So thank you for that, and for letting me be a part of that. So I'm a psychotherapist by trade. That's the work that I've been doing for quite a while now. And I had been working in this field for about 10 years when I got married, got pregnant, had a little girl, and she had passed away when she was just 1 day old. And to this day, no one really knows why we lost Nora, but that really became my experience of motherhood. And so after I had taken some time off of all work to kind of try to get my own head on straight and figure out which side of life was up anymore, I started to create the Love and Loss Project, which is an online gathering and supports and resources for women and couples who have experienced a loss of a miscarriage or baby, and are, trying to navigate what that world kind of looks like, especially in a culture where we're not kind of really supposed to talk about those things. And so now that work supports people in 24 different countries. So that is something I'm really proud of, and I feel like is a part of the legacy that I have created for my little girl. And along the way, I kind of came to learn and experience, two really significant things. And so one was that I came to realize that these pictures that we have in our heads of what we think our life is going to look like and what that life is going to be that makes us happy, we really hang on to that, because that's kind of what we've been chasing so long, that it's like we think when we get to that place that we're going to be able to recognize it, and then we're going to be able to stop and rest. And what I came to kind of experience through my my life was almost this kind of surprising revelation of realizing that time had moved by really fast in some ways. And I had gone through a divorce and ended up single, and in a new relationship. And along that way, I almost came to kind of realize that I had created a life that looked absolutely nothing like the life I once absolutely thought I was going to have, and had Pinterested, on my board of what that was going to be for me. But I created a life that actually felt really good, and felt really love-filled, and felt full and satisfying. And so that's kind of how I've become really a big believer of the importance of this work that you've been doing, Katie, of trying to create community for women that are not parenting. Because the other thing that I became acutely aware of along the way is what an absolutely radical and sometimes strange experience it is to be a woman who is not parenting. And so, yeah, I thank you for creating the space and for welcoming people and myself into it. So thanks for that, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just really love what you said, because that was my whole idea behind the name of, the blog that I started, which is Chasing Creation, was this idea that, I think we think of life as we're trying to get to this destination, and then we did it, and then that's our life. But really, that's not how life works. So I feel like it's a series of constant creation, and even if you do get the thing you were planning on, there's going to be a next thing and a different thing. So I really like the way you put that. Can you let people know where they can find you online?
Sure. So I'm at aprilboyd.ca. That's where I have my psychotherapy practice, where I work with a lot of couples, and I work with women on, life changes and anxiety, and also, of course, loss. And then the loveandlossproject.com, which is there's a ton of free support and little programs and resources for people, because that was part of my vision. I wanted there to be support available to people wherever they had Wi-Fi 24/7. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram way more than I would like to admit some days at with.love.april.
Great, thank you so much. And I know you said you're based in Turkey. So do you do any online sessions with people, or are you locally based?
So I work 100% online with people. And so
Okay.
that had kind of come to be of just, I found I had a lot of people that kind of session really worked for them for different busy lifestyles anyways. And then, of course, as my partner was moving with his work, then it became a really great way for me to stay connected with all the people I was working with. So
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I know I definitely have so many women reach out to me who have experienced loss, and it's not something that I have personally experienced. So I love finding good accounts that I can help direct people to, that can give them a different level of support that I'm able to offer. So thank you. And Lesley, I'm so excited for you to join us. I have read your book in the past and have been following you for a long time. So excited to have you here. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you for inviting me, actually. Yeah, so I'm Lesley Pyne. I'm in London, and I do have a cocktail. I've got a mojito here, actually, but
All right.
might well drink it afterwards. We'll see. My story was we started trying to get pregnant when I was 35, which I realise now was too late. We had 6 unsuccessful rounds of IVF, and didn't realise I was grieving at the time. Just carried on, because that's what I'd learned to do from my family and growing up. A few years later, my mum died, and again, my grief, I just bottled it all up. Put it in a box, actually. I remember actually physically putting it in a box. And then a few years later, my dad died, and I didn't grieve. And in that time, I thought, up till my dad died, I thought I was okay. And I trained in coaching and NLP, and was supporting childless women. And I started collecting stories of women who'd sort of made it through. And I thought there was some commonality with the stories, with what they did. And I started to write my book, Finding Joy Beyond Childlessness, which I don't know if it appears backwards or not to you, but there you go. And there were things in common, and I dug deep into each of those subjects, things like grieving, self-acceptance, letting go, connecting to your body. And the writing and seeing a therapist, the two things together, were the work that I needed to do to get myself through. And I feel completely different now. People said I look younger, which I'll take that any day. And I feel comfortable in my own skin and happy with the life I love. And I really recognise what you were saying, April, about that life, because I think I use the butterfly metaphor quite a lot in my book, and we thought that motherhood would transform us into that beautiful butterfly, and when that doesn't happen, we don't know what shape and colour our wings are to be. And in some ways that's very freeing, and also it's what do I do? How do I get there? And I think having people like those of us who've got through it, it's great to see that. Which is what I wanted to show in my book. People have made this journey before. There is a path there, absolutely. You can find that life ahead. And so yeah, I mean, I blog, and you can find me at lesleypyne.com. And if you sign up to my newsletter, you'll get a free first chapter of my book. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Your book is fantastic. So if you guys are looking for recommendations for books that are specifically on this topic of being child-free or childless after infertility, it is really fantastic. And I feel like there are so few. When I was making the decision to stop trying to conceive, it was really a lifeline to me, along with a few other books I was able to find, because there are not many. So I really appreciate you putting the time and effort into creating that for those of us who are coming up behind you and needing a guide. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, so it looks like Kelly is joining us from Minneapolis. She's drinking some coffee. If you are also joining, feel free to tell us where you're at and what you're drinking. April's got some wine. I'm jealous of the drinks. I should have when I was new here. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into questions. So Lesley, I wanted to start with you because I think that as I was thinking about this topic of kind of like what we nurture or create or, mother, birth, or whatever you want to call it, I think for a lot of us, we planned on having a child to pour some of those types of type of energy into. And one thing that really hit me after my hysterectomy was that I got to a place of very deep grief, and I started realizing that there was someone in my life that needed compassion and love, and that was me. I was desperately in need of that kind of nurturing, loving energy. And I think a lot of times we are focused as women on what we're putting out and how we're being helpful and who we're nurturing that's outside of ourselves. But I think that first and foremost, especially when we've gone through something so traumatic, it's really important that some of that nurturing comes back to us. So I know that's something that you talk about a lot in your book, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that kind of self-nurturing or self-care has looked like for you.
Well, again, for me, it was not something that was forefront of my priorities. I grew up in my parents were both very much about service and putting others before yourself. That was just, so it was hard lessons for me to learn, but I've learned that you can't pour from an empty cup, can you? You have to do that first. And to start, I think a couple of things that were key for me. First is about boundaries and healthy boundaries. And in the early days, it was about making sure that doing what was right. So not going to christenings, not going to baby showers, sort of keeping clear of those things that were going to be really, really hard. For me now, my boundaries are more about putting my needs for the forefront. So it's about self-care, going for a walk on my own, being strict about my hobbies, going to yoga classes, things like that I know that nurture me, especially as an introvert, sort of keeping time on my own. And the other thing I've been doing more recently is about self-love. And I've got a couple of questions that I ask myself, because love is one of my words for this year. And it's like, what's the loving action to take here? And what would I choose if I love myself? Because sometimes, especially I can eat a whole bar of chocolate at a time, but that's not the loving action. Eating a couple of squares would be the loving action, so it's like and that has really changed some of my small habits. So especially around eating, which is a great way of, you can start by nurturing, but once you get past the nurture, then it becomes, it becomes unhealthy. So yeah, the boundaries and the self-love are a couple of things that are really, really key for me at the moment.
Thank you. April, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I love that idea, because I think that makes so much sense to me, right? And that's something that I think, even for my own self, is still an ongoing dance, right? All the time. And I think there's kind of this myth sometimes that we get to this point that you've got it all figured out and then it's good, but it's always a dance, right? So even in this quarantine kind of life, I find myself eating the whole chocolate, right? And you're like, that's not loving. That's not what I want really. That's something else, right? That's stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing that I have is on my board behind my desk is something that I've called small pleasures. So it's a list of things that are, which just small things. They can be low cost or they can be free. So things like reading for 10 minutes, a coffee, mojito maybe, calling a friend, especially at the moment. And lots of just small stop and look at the sky, you know, and I try to do at least a couple of those every day. And it's when I sit at my desk, it's just to the side of my desk. So I think that's a really great thing that we can do at the moment, especially, you know, when everyone's struggling in one way or another. So there's, you know, little things that can be free or low cost. I think that's it's a really important way of just ratcheting up that self-love and the self-care.
Yeah, I love that, because I think a lot of times we think when we're trying to plan or think about what our lives should look like, we think on such a huge scale that it's always these big, huge things that we're trying to accomplish or move towards. And I am a huge fan of the little moments. And I think my husband and I both are just huge fans of routine and having like say small luxuries, but I'm not talking about expensive things. I'm talking about same things you are. I love my bath time. I take baths every single day. Like I do not miss, and they are long and they are filled with candles and bath salts, and it's like my time to relax. And it seems simple, and it is, but those things can really go a long way in just giving you that downtime. And
well, I think it's about telling yourself that you matter, that isn't it? And you know, those little loving actions, buying some hand cream or something, it's all tiny little steps that gradually build into something bigger. I mean,
all right, well, thank you. It looks like we also have Andy from Denver drinking coffee, so welcome, Andy. All right, so my next question, April, is for you. I have this woman, Michelle Soto, is childless. She was on one of my previous webinars, and I love one of the things she said, which is that parenthood can feel like you have this like direct, streamlined place to like put your love. It seems so simple and just like automatic of like, here's where I'm going to devote that love. And she said, you know, for those of us who don't have children, she loves spreading her love in unexpected ways and like a broader way, which, you know, she relates to like, oh, even if I'm at the grocery store, you know, I'll try to have that extra conversation and smile and have an interaction with the checkout person to try to lift their day or something. And so she's really looking for ways to kind of expand the way she thinks about love and how she can give that in kind of this less direct, obvious way of like, you know, you've got this child that needs it and you're going to just streamline it all there. So, and I have another friend who is childless, and she said that was the most difficult thing, was feeling like she had all this love inside of her and didn't really know where to place it. And I think we're living in a world that there are so many that are lonely and that need love. I think we talk about loneliness as something within the childless community that we fear. But if you look at polls worldwide of how many people say they're lonely or afraid of loneliness, it's the majority of people. So it's not just those of us who are childless. But I do think that with so many needing that love in the world, you know, how can we reframe the way that we think about this? And, you know, what are some examples of where we can invest that kind of like love?
Well, I love that question, and I love all of the thoughtfulness around that, because that resonates so much for me. And one of the things that I hear kind of woven all the way through that, and I can certainly relate to, is that fear, right? That fear that somehow I'm not going to have a love-filled life because I'm not parenting, that somehow I'm going to experience less goodness, less connection, less depth of relationship. And I think it's kind of no wonder that we end up with that fear, because I would add that it's not just that that's the most direct and obvious way to us. It's that we are culturally, I believe, we're told that that is not just the, ideal, that's the expectation, is that as women, our love goes into our children. And, I think we don't have to look far to look at really evidence of that positioning. I, play this game when my husband and I go to, different events sometimes where I'll say, so how many times did you get asked tonight if you have kids? And a lot of the time it's none. And he'll say, how many times did you get asked? And a lot of times it's somewhere like 8, 9, 10, which kind of raises that interesting question of what are his conversations about, right? And really, when we look at that, he's getting asked about his accomplishments. He's getting asked about his work life. He's getting asked about his interests. And I don't know what your experience is or if this should relate to this. Half the time that someone asks me if I have kids and I say no, they're done. It's a dead stop conversation. And often I hear people, it's this, it's funny but not funny thing where I'll say, no, actually I don't, because there's just times for me where I give myself permission to say, do I want to have an emotional conversation with this person in this particular setting, right? Because sometimes I don't want to talk about my daughter here today. And it's this interesting thing because I'll hear people say, oh, you don't? And I'm like, nope. And then it's over. They're on to the next conversation. So I think when we look at this, there's all that identity, all that expectation, all of those hopes and dreams of where we think we're going to be pouring our love into. And it can become really panicky to think that we are now cut off from that. And so what I really encourage people to think about and to remind themselves of and notice is that you're already feeling all of that love. That is already existing in you, even before you even really have this idea of what this potential child might look like, really, right? That already exists in you. And I think it's really important to really own that awareness that you are the vessel for that love. It's no external partner or no external child that is creating that for you. That's you. That's already existing. And so I think it is that neat place of really just noticing that and then giving permission to start to step into that. And I really look at the idea of, I think you just kind of have to follow what lights you up bit by bit. And I think that's kind of what creates those new places and new outlets for you, is really just that act of following what lights you up. So for me, that has looked like creating a community, offering support to other people, but it certainly doesn't have to be that directly related to your own story. I think I look at people and they put that love into community in all kinds of different ways, or being an aunt in different ways, or just being really present and working the relationship with a partner, or just really tapping into what does feel like some of your other passions or purpose, because all of that is still there, right? And sometimes it's that thing that we don't even know it's there because that's maybe been a part of ourselves that we've not been as curious about when we've been focused on, here's the picture of what my life is going to look like, right? And then these are the things I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, oh, I love that, because I see that so much of myself too, that yes, I don't have that like direct connection to a child where like a lot of my time and attention and love and energy is being streamlined into that. But that the flip side of that is that then you all of a sudden have this more options in where you choose to invest that. So, similarly, I do policy work at the nonprofit that I work for that's focused on, passing children's issues for the world's most vulnerable children. And I feel like that's like a way that I can direct that. But then, I've also created community through Youth and Creation, and I love the connection that I get there. And, my therapist said, like, yeah, if you had had a child, you wouldn't have had that in your life because you wouldn't be here where you were creating that. And I think it's nice to know that it can be invested. It's more of a choice where you invest it, I guess. And I've spent the last 2 years personally really investing in friendships and, you know, making sure that I'm putting the amount of time into my friendships that I want to in order to nurture those. And so I think that's like a benefit, I guess, is you still have that love and attention and nurturing or whatever you want to call it that you can give, but you have more flexibility in where you want to spend that. So, all right. So, Lesley, I'm going to come back to you. So, again, like when I think about this idea of nurturing, I tie it a lot to a sense of creation and creativity. And so I use the term very broadly as not just like nurturing people, because I also really push back against this idea that if we're not mothering children, we need to mother someone else or something else, you know? And so I think of it much more broadly in terms of, you know, creation can look a number of ways. And I really like to focus on what other things can I create or birth into this world that are not children. And I see you as an example of someone who has just created so much in your life. I mean, you obviously have written your book, which is really provided support to others who are going through this, but you've also created community through your website and through your social media accounts. And in just researching a little bit more about you, I see that you have so many different hobbies and passions that you're involved in, that you have just such a full life. And a lot of it is this intentional creation of, you know, what you're choosing to put your time into. So I think for a lot of women who are just coming to terms with a childless life, maybe they're just ending their infertility journeys and this is very new for them, it can be difficult to start thinking in different terms of, you know, what is my life going to be filled with now? Like I have space and I don't know, that I wasn't expecting to have. What am I going to fill it with? And so as just someone who's such a great example of creativity and creation, I would love to hear your thoughts on, you know, how you've approached this in your own life.
Thank you. Well, I never used to think that I was creative because I can't draw, I can't paint. And for me, that was the definition of being creative. And a friend of mine said to me that that's ridiculous. And so that led me to start to think more broadly. And I also, I take into mind, I love Brené Brown's work, and she talks about us having scars from our art that at some point, most of us will have somebody in like a teacher or a parent who said, you're not good at painting, drawing, writing, and that's still a scar that we have to sort of recover, you know, sort of work through. So yeah, that's one thing to bear in mind. I mean, for me, it's been a sort of scavenger hunt, if you like. And I one of the questions I asked myself was, what did I used to enjoy as a child? And you know, we forget about that. We used to do all these great things when we didn't have those scars, and we used to play and we did things because we enjoyed it. And so I started doing embroidery. I was in a choir for many years, and I did sort of a couple of projects that my mum started, a couple of tapestries that she started. I finished those, and my embroidery particularly, I just absolutely love it. I mean, it's not perfect, but I make things and I give them to people, so that gives me the satisfaction, the making and the giving away, and it stretches my abilities. So I just I think just try things for me. I've made hand cream. I was supposed to be going on a soap making course, but we had to cancel it. But I think I love Elizabeth Gilbert's as well. She talks about not everyone's got their passion and purpose, but what she suggests is follow your curiosity. So if you're interested in something, follow it, try it, you know, and which is what my philosophy is. You know, I'm also studying. I started yoga, and I'm studying along those lines. But and I'm just trying it, and if I don't like it, I don't need to carry on and do any more. But you know, just try new things. I guess that would be two questions. What did you used to love to do as a child? That would be my first thing. Go back and do that. And yeah, what are you interested in? What are you curious about? And follow that. And if it doesn't work out, try something else. So yeah, that would be my two suggestions.
Yeah, I love that so much because I love the idea that we don't have to attach it to, you know, being great at it or producing something
Exactly.
that's museum worthy or whatever. Like it's just about the time. And I think you mentioned this in your book. You said it somewhere that you've gotten together with childless friends where
That's right.
you have craft days where
That's right.
you
Yeah.
each bring a creative
Mm.
project with you and just spend time working on it and chatting. And sorry, I'm like reading this because I
No,
wanted to
you're right. Yeah.
so that you said the original idea was that um since you don't have children, you don't generally do as many creative things, and so this was a way to kind of bring that back into your life. And I just really love that idea that um
Mm.
it's just such a fun way to think about. I think if you do have kids, you are thinking more about creative projects you can do with them, and
Mm.
so continue to keep play and creation in your life,
Yeah.
regardless.
It's great because we had I'd forgotten about that actually, and but yes, and one of the girls who came, she was great at icing cakes, so she helped me to ice a Christmas cake, which is something that I would never have done on my own. But you know, so it's a way of sharing skills as well. But yeah, and we did. We I had one in January actually. Just 3 friends came over. We sat, we chatted. We you know what one friend came once and she said her skill was talking, so that was fine, you know, no pressure to do anything. So but yeah, I think it's just do things that, like I think what you said, April, was do things, follow your what lights you up. That's the thing, isn't it? That's the, you know,
Mhm.
follow your heart always knows what's best for you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it looks like Marnie is joining from Minneapolis and is just drinking water. Good, healthy. Those of us in the US, it's like too early for us to get going on the on the alcohol, but welcome, Marnie. So, okay, so my next question, April, is for you. So I was looking on your Love and Loss Project website in preparation for this, and something you said really stood out to me, which is you said through this project you offer practical, gentle ways of navigating relationships and life after loss. And I just really love how beautifully you stated that, and it made me think about how many forms of loss those of us who are childless face. So obviously, in your case, it was literally the loss of your child, or if someone loses a pregnancy. Um, and for others, you know, like me, who despite years of trying never got pregnant, it could just be the loss of that future that I had envisioned for myself. So as you're working with clients, I, you know, or people who have been through this, that grief stage is just so heavy, and I think it can be hard to know where to start when you're grieving and really deep in that process. And so I'm wondering if you have recommendations for where people can start to just apply that kind of gentle, nurturing energy, both maybe to themselves or, like you said, with their relationships.
And I just really want to thank you for that and highlight that, you know, this grief comes in so many different forms, and it is all so incredibly valid, because I think this is one of the things that you know, we're all kind of navigating, is that there's so much that becomes invisible about our loss, right? And so the loss of that life, the loss of that identity, there's so many layers of such deep and profound grief, right? That sometimes really does not get acknowledged, of how absolutely massive that is. And I think that one of the things that really made a difference for me, I'm so grateful for the clients I'd worked with before I went through any of this, because I honestly learned from my clients, when I look back on it, a few things that were really, I think, made a big difference for me in my own kind of survival through this. And one of them was that I knew to be actually quite afraid of grief, which sounds a bit scary to even put it that way. But I had met enough successful, highly intelligent, highly capable people who had become kind of shells of themselves with just all of that cumulative grief in their lives. And so I knew very clearly, without any mystery or mystique around it at all, that when things had really, you know, fallen apart in my world, and I lost my daughter and all the ripple effects that kind of came with that, I was very aware that I was standing at this crossroads. And I knew that this was the kind of thing that changes you, right? You do not come out the other side of this as your previous self. And so one of the things that was really helpful for me was really this idea that saying, even though I don't know how I'm going to get through this just yet, right? And that's me, even as a psychotherapist, none of that felt like it came with any sense of confidence or like, okay, I've got this, right? Because that's just how big grief really is. But I knew I needed to like pick a direction. And that, because I knew if I didn't, that was kind of the risk, is that we risk really becoming shells of ourselves. And for me, one of the things that helped motivate me to kind of really push myself that direction was knowing that there was people here who still needed me to be okay. And also that was not the legacy that I wanted to create for my little girl, right? That if I was a hot mess from that point forward, that would be how my friends and family would know my daughter. April was fine until Nora happened. But I think, really that applies also to all the people who are around you and who need you here and who need you to become alive again, right? And so, as I look at that kind of process, and that's a hard dance, right? Because when we're even looking at how to be more loving, right? How to be a more love-filled version of ourselves and have all this pain kind of transform into something that we can use in a way. And I do love this idea. I wish I could properly credit who said it, but I remember hearing somebody say one time fairly recently that if you don't transform your pain, you will transfer it onto the people around you, because that's just how pain works. And so I think that can also feel a little bit overwhelming for people sometimes, right? When that feels so far away. So I think it's important to remember, I'm not always super loving and always super generous, right? And kind of like Lesley touched on earlier with that idea of not going to baby showers and not doing those things. One of the things that I made peace with a long time ago was I'm not going to be able to be that friend for you in that way, right? Like you have other people that can meet that need for you. Cool. I'll show up sometime later, right? Like when I feel kind of more able to do that. But I think that's where a lot of people get really stuck, because it's like we feel guilty for feeling good, right? Because it's almost like that feels strange. And we feel guilty for that envy, and we feel guilty for that anger, and we feel guilty for that jealousy that is inevitably a part of that process. So I really believe very much in the idea that you've got to make room for all of that, right? The part of you that's loving and the part of you that is not so loving right now. Because I think that really is that idea of, what we resist gets stronger. And I want to show you one more thing that made a really big difference for me. So just hold on one second if that's okay.
Yeah. And while April is getting whatever it is she's getting, we are going to be taking questions from you guys in a few minutes.
Oh. And I absolutely needed somewhere tangible and practical for my love to go. And so, one of the best decisions that I made for myself was I needed something to hold. I needed something to also like force me to get out of bed some days. And so, I think whatever that is for you that allows you to tap into feeling a little bit more alive, a little bit more bringing a little bit of goodness in. And I love Lesley's point that it's not that you go into the bubble bath because the bubble bath is nice. It's that you go into the bubble bath of this kind of radical thought that I deserve to feel a little good. I deserve to be nurtured and cared for. So those are some of my ideas for that. And this is Sasha, who wants to go outside.
Oh, all right. I have some thoughts about what you said. I do want to let people know we'll be taking questions in a few minutes. So if you have questions for us, please either add them in the comment box or the chat box. And Kelly said she also has a sleeping Yorkie on her lap. How cute.
Perfect.
So yes, please add your questions. We'll get to those in a few minutes. and there is just so much wisdom in this group here with you too. So definitely get your questions in, because this is such a great great place to get some advice. So a few things came up for me as you were talking about grief. I think it's just such a difficult thing because like you said, it looks different for everybody. And I know for me, I was probably really deep into grief for a couple of years before I had a name for it. Like I was really confused about my emotions, and I didn't really understand why certain things were hitting me so hard, or why I like couldn't feel like I could get myself together. And once I learned the term actually disenfranchised grief, which is the idea that it's a grief that's not recognized by others or by society, that really changed things for me, because all of a sudden I had a name, and I'm like, oh, I can now look up like research studies and read books, and like other people have experienced grief and they know what this looks like, and so I can try to learn from them. And like it really opened up this new way of being able to process what I was going through. And I think a lot of the healing that's taken place in my last 2 years has been because of that shift, and because I was able to find resources specific to that. And it's really hard to face. Lesley, I get like your initial reaction of just wanting to push it away or put it somewhere else, because it feels terrible. Like to actually have to feel that. And April, you saying that you were scared because you'd seen your clients just turn into shells of themselves. And I think that even the strongest of us, like that's going to happen for a while. Like despite your best efforts, like you can't really avoid it, because your life has changed dramatically, and it's just how things have to be for a bit. And so I think it's, that being gentle with yourself as you're going through that, and finding the support that you need when you need it. I have seen therapists for, years now, and just helping me work through it, seeking out books, seeking out other people who get it, and really facing that grief, which is tough. It's not fun, but and it still comes. I think we'll probably always get hit with those waves, but it becomes more comfortable, I guess, and less heavy, and you can learn how to manage it and get those parts of yourself back. So, and I really love what you said about that, and just, taking those small steps to come back and nurture yourself and take those steps towards healing. So I have one more question, Lesley, for you. It looks like we have one question from someone who's watching, but if you guys have other questions, we only have one so far, so please send those in. Lesley, one thing that I'm so grateful to you for, and other women like you, is that, and I was saying this when we were talking earlier, is this idea that so many of the women that I connect to are just coming to terms with their childlessness. It's so raw and new for them, and we don't have the luxury of seeing 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into our future to know what that might look like, and what healing can take place during that time, or what other things we can be filling our lives with moving forward. And I think for a lot of people who they grieve, they heal, they move on, and childlessness does not stay such a big part of their identities. And so we lose them in the community and that wisdom that comes with it, because they have moved on and made fulfilling, wonderful lives, and they don't need to stick around. So I really appreciate that you have been willing to write your book as a way to guide us, but also that you're still involved in the community, even though you've got this full wonderful life. You could easily check out and be like, I don't identify with this as much anymore, I don't need it, so I'm on to other things, which is a great option too. But I'm just so grateful that you're willing to stick around with us and help provide your wisdom and guidance to us. So as someone who is a little bit further along in your journey and has had time to really process and build something outside of a childless identity, I would love to know if you have advice for someone who has been holding space for children, planning on that for their lives, and has just recently come to terms with the fact that they will be living a childless life, and just advice for what should we be doing or thinking about.
Well, I think really following a bit on from what April was saying, is that I also resonate with being afraid of grief, and we model, or we do what um, what we've learned in our families when we're growing up. And I think the thing is that we are afraid of grief, but don't be. You have to go through it. For me, it took me many years, and maybe it happened at the right time for me. But I think that is that it you have to go through it. You have to do the work, and I think it can also be an opportunity. Actually, it's like that. I use the butterfly metaphor in my book, that it is a chance to strip away all those beliefs and the armor that we've built during the first part of our life, and find your true self. Also, I think somebody described it in there as that a lot of women go through this process when their children leave. That they have that "who am I?" and it's an opportunity to do that a bit sooner. It's sort of like, I think people have described it as a midlife awakening. So it's not easy, and only you can do it, but you can. And I think to follow on with that is that sort of find there is a path. You can find happiness and joy. I think that's the thing that really makes me very sad, more than anything, is when I hear men and women saying, "I'm always going to feel like this. I'll never be happy," and I just want to say, no, that doesn't have to be the case. That's the one thing that drives me, actually. I mean, there's many ways into this place that we call childless, and there are many ways out. That one of the reasons I wrote my book was to share lots of other stories, and what my path looks like won't be the same as yours. But there is a path, and there's definitely, you can definitely find your happiness and joy afterwards. That's my one message, actually, that I'll stop now.
Yeah, I love that. That's perfect. Okay, so we got a question from someone at home. So how do you, I'll let both of you, share your thoughts on this. How do you handle the sinking, hard-hitting feelings whenever others talk about their children? So I don't know if either of you wants to tackle that first. That's a tough one.
You want to go first, Lesley, or would you like me to?
No, you go first, actually.
Sure. So I think when we look at that moment, there's almost two layers of pain, right? And so one is that kind of sucker punch feeling that we get in our gut of, listening to that and all that opens up for us. But I think the other layer of pain that often gets added on top of that is that guilt and discomfort that we feel for even feeling that impacted, right? And I know something I hear a lot from other people is this idea that, then they feel like they're being a bad friend, or then they feel like they're being a bad family member. And really, when we look at it, that's just one more of the things that this grief and experience has kind of taken from you, right? Is this ability to just have those be nice and pleasant moments. Because sometimes I talk to people and they, oh my goodness, I started this one client one time, so I'll make this quick. But she was saying to me about how she had volunteered to host her friend's baby shower. And she was understandably gut-wrenched, right? Really thinking about how she was going to do this. And when we kind of looked at it, the reason why she had even offered to do this was because she felt really guilty not doing it. And, I think there's just kind of new rules that apply when you've actually been, through this, whatever kind of grief and loss this has been for you, that you've ended up in this circle. I think we have to just really acknowledge that there's new rules. And so it's okay to be the friend that just shows up for like an hour and then has another reason why you have to go, or just send something. And so I think that same thing kind of applies, that when you're talking to somebody, you're allowed to be feeling what you're feeling, like first and foremost, you're just allowed to. And I think when we give ourselves permission to say, I'm allowed to feel this, not only is it valid, but it's inevitable, then we can kind of step into a whole different thing of, what do I want to do with this feeling? And it might be that you endure that moment and then take care of that feeling later, or it might be that you give yourself permission to change the topic. Or it might be that you give yourself permission to be like, I'm sorry, I just can't go there right now. I'm having a bad day. Is it okay if we talk about something else? you know, I love your kids and that's great, but like, is it
Mm.
okay if we don't talk about that right now?
Mhm.
Permission.
Mm.
Thank you. Lesley, what are your thoughts?
I don't think I've got anything to add to that, actually. I guess the only thing I would say that for me, I've got further down the line that I don't mind. It's okay. The next thing that'll be coming up with friends becoming grandparents, actually. But so I just hold out that I mean, our neighbours, we're in a townhouse, terraced house, and they've got 2 young children, and we can hear them through the wall. And I don't mind that, actually. You know, years ago I would have done. So I just hold out that it gets better. It gets better.
Yeah, I mean, I would say even in just the 2 years since my decision became official, my ability to handle and navigate things now versus 2 years ago is just huge, such a big difference. And I think a lot of that is with the grief work and processing and starting to rebuild my life. I feel the closer I get to feeling more like myself again, like the self that I had before all this trauma hit, the easier it is for me to have those conversations and not get hit as hard with the grief piece. But it is difficult, and I think it's I think that's the thing that's hard with grief, is it's such a slow process and you want to speed it up somehow and you can't. So
I guess the other thing I would add, that in my initial years, both myself and my husband gave off that aura that we didn't want children, or we weren't interested in children. And it was quite a shock to some of our friends when we told them everything. But that worked really well for us while we healed inside. You know, so I was at the stage when I was at work, and if somebody came in to talk about their babies, it was okay to walk away, because, you know, that was what people thought of me. And you know, that I think that's great to start with when you are healing inside. Obviously, at some point you have to change that narrative, but do whatever works for you, I would say. And as you said, walk away, change the subject. Yeah.
all right, so I love this question from another attendee here. So she said that she's in the very beginning of grief. This is all very new for her, so she's feeling overwhelmed, and in her trying to think about what lights her up feels like another challenge, and that she doesn't have the answer to. And so she's asking, is there a step before that one that you can suggest? And I will say, just from, you know, I've been running a monthly support group for women who are childless, and also doing a weekly happy hour, which has sometimes started to feel like a support group as different topics come up. And just in getting feedback from, you know, other women in our community, I think that this is such a common thing, that the immediate jump from, okay, I can't have kids, the immediate jump is, what is the replacement for that? What do I build? What will my life look like? And if you're still in that coming to terms with acceptance and really deep in that grief stage, it can feel like a negative thing to now feel this pressure of, oh great, now not only am I grieving and I feel like I'm at my limit of what I can process or handle right now, but now others are expecting me to come out of this bigger and better, and have some big plan that's like can match or rival having children. And so now it's like this new pressure of, oh, I'm like so tired from all this, and now I have to create this big new thing. So I think, you know, for me, again, that came a few years later, where I'm at now, where I'm just starting to really think in terms of, what do I want my life to look like? But so for women who are just in this early stage of, this is very new for them, the acceptance piece, they're getting hit with these waves of grief, what recommendations do you guys have for maybe what they can focus on until they are feeling ready to think about what lights them up and getting back into life again?
I absolutely love that this person is asking this, because definitely I hear this all the time, and I can certainly relate it. It really takes me back to some of those earlier stages for me. So I have 2 thoughts that I want to share on that. So for me, at the beginning, I really made the decision that I was going to say yes and go do things, not because I felt like doing it, you know, during that stage. I didn't feel like going to yoga. What I felt like doing was jumping off a bridge, right? So like, that's not what I felt like doing, but I knew that it would be good for me. And I knew that I needed to get to a place where I could feel okay again. And then the other kind of thing that I think in practical terms, you know, you could really just be asking yourself, what feels less crappy? Does it feel less crappy to sit at home and watch Netflix? Or does it feel a little bit like you're tapping into something that your system is getting some benefit from if you roll out your yoga mat or do some crochet or go take a bath? What feels less crappy? Because I think you have to start to fill that cup, and it does take a long time before it moves kind of from surviving to feeling like that flicker of light, and then from that flicker of light to feeling actual happiness and joy again.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, April. Lesley, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't think I've got anything to add really. That's a great question. I think what feels less crappy. I just go back to what I said before about the small pleasures. Really, that again, I think they're great things to do. Just do a couple of just gentle, small things that don't cost much or don't cost anything. That just not that they light you up, but they make it less crappy than it was before.
Yeah, and I think for me too, like I said, having a name to what I was feeling and recognizing, oh, this is grief and it's a valid grief, that gave me permission then to take some of that pressure off of myself of, oh, I have to just move on from this like nothing happened and just keep going at my regular pace or with my regular happiness or personality or whatever. Like I couldn't do that because I had changed so much and I didn't feel like myself and I didn't know how to just get back into everything. And so I think that allowing yourself permission to just be where you're at and realize that the grief that you're feeling is valid and your life has been really disrupted and you've been through something that for a lot of people can create trauma, and that is where you're at right now. And that doesn't mean you'll always be there, but giving yourself permission to not feel that pressure of I've got to have all the answers right now, but just realizing, you know, respecting where you're at and just say, okay, like if like you said, April, if what I can do today is just get the yoga mat out or like, you know, do those small nurturing things for yourself, that's enough. Like you know, you don't have to have a huge plan right now. You don't let that pressure go because it's just going to make it feel worse, and you're okay where you're at right now. It's just part of the process. So oh, this has been just such a great conversation. I feel like we could probably go for many more hours and just have such a great conversation. But I really want to thank both of you, April and Lesley, for joining me. I think that this will be really helpful to a lot of people. And so I do want to give you both just a chance to, again, let people know where they can find you. And if you have, you know, different services that you offer or something that you would like to, you know, connect our audience with, let us know. So April, do you want to start?
Sure. So thank you so much for creating this space and for having me be a part of it, and for people for sharing their questions. Yeah, really nice to spend this time with all of you. So I'm at lovelossproject.com and aprilboyd.ca, and also on Instagram with .love.april. And I'm happy to just hear from people. Let me know what comes up for you after this. Let me know if there's anything that kind of feels heavy on you. I'm happy just to kind of be that listening ear. And yeah, and if people feel like they need a little bit more support, I have a few free resources and programs on my Love Loss Project if people have experienced the loss of a pregnancy. And on my other site, aprilboyd.ca, I have some stuff for relationships that people might find useful. So I've got some free little mini programs. One of the ones that I really like right now is called How to Get Your Partner to Understand Why You're Mad. And so that sometimes can be a bit helpful in real life, especially during quarantine times. So yeah, that's where to find me.
Great, thank you. Lesley.
Okay, so that's my book, Finding Joy Beyond Childlessness. My website is lesliepyne.co.uk. You'll find a load of blogs. I blog about once a month, and if you sign up to my newsletter, I won't bombard you with stuff, but I will send you chapter 1 of my book. And yes, I should have said thank you so much as well for inviting me and for creating this space. I think it's nurturing and creativity are great passions of mine, so it's lovely to be able to share. And as you said, I think we could probably talk for a lot longer. But
I think so too.
anyone got any questions or anything, yeah, just drop me a line, info@lesliepyne.co.uk. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I know I've got a little longer left than you guys do in your time zones, but yeah, have a great weekend and thank you again for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.